You're listening to Reasonable Doubt, the podcast where we break down the most famous criminal trials and the arguments that either made or broke the case. Today, we'll be diving into the case of the People versus O.J. Simpson. The evidence murky, the opinions heated, the logical fallacies plenty. So let's tune in, and today's guest is Matthew.
So, what was this case about? Well, in 1995, O.J. Simpson was put on trial for the murder of his wife, Nicole Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. Throughout the timeline, there are two key factors that really sensationalized this case. One, the murder was violent, with Nicole Simpson being stabbed to death outside of her apartment sometime in the night of June 12, 1994. Next, O.J. only became the prime suspect within the case after he fled from police when being asked to come in for questioning. This led to an almost 2-hour car chase across Southern California, where the police pleaded with O.J. to pull over while he threatened suicide from within his car. Now, to understand how the verdict was reached, we need to analyze the evidence that both the defense and prosecution had. Starting with the prosecution, they relied on the abuse that Nicole Simpson faced during her relationship with O.J. Central aspects being the bruises found all over her body and 911 calls that Nicole had made.
Hey, just stay on the line.
I don't want to stay on the line. You're going to beat the shit.
But the most crucial piece of evidence were her diary entries, detailing months of emotional and physical harm she faced through her marriage. This was to convince the jury that O.J. was a violent man, and had become increasingly more violent after their divorce, insinuating that a physical attack, like the one Nicole Simpson faced on the night of her death, was likely inevitable. For the defense, the core argument was that the evidence had been planted. The narrative was reinforced by the unfolding Rampart scandal within the LAPD, which was gaining public attention just as O.J. Simpson's trial began. The Rampart scandal involved proven allegations that LAPD officers had been planting evidence to secure convictions, particularly against gang members in California. Using this context to cast doubt on the integrity of the investigation, the defense pointed to two key pieces of evidence: the gloves and the bloody socks found at O.J.'s house, as examples of items that could have been planted. By showing the jury that the gloves were too big for his hands, it was obvious that the LAPD had targeted O.J. Next, the blood that was found on the socks at O.J.'s house had key EDTA samples, EDTA being a biological compound found within blood used in lab. EDTA prevents the blood from coagulating, and since the blood on the sock didn't have any naturally occurring properties, the defense was able to rule out that the socks were not his. Now, I don't want to be too mean to our guest, but Matthew, I'm still confused how you think O.J. Simpson is guilty. I mean, the prosecution had nothing left after the defense's testimony and evidence.
I know, but we need to understand the motive. The defendant had a serious history of physical violence against his wife, and I think her own diary entries are a better piece of evidence than any eyewitness.
Honestly, you're beginning to make me believe that maybe you know how well a killer thinks because you think like one.
If he said he didn't do it, then he didn't do it, and it's no surprise that the evidence lines up with his statement. Plus, do you really think someone as successful as O.J. would jeopardize his entire career by murdering his ex-wife? I mean, they were divorced for almost 2 years. Plus, everyone at the time loved the guy, and there's no way he could just turn into a murderer.
What, are you really buying the story the cops planted evidence just because he's black? That's like saying the entire LAPD is racist.
Yeah, but planted evidence is not out of the question either. I mean, just look at the Rampart allegations. Every single day, there's a new headline the LAPD not only working with gang members, but setting them up as well. And considering how closely the timeline overlaps, obviously some of the cops must have had to planted things.
Plus, this was a chance to make an example of a bad detective. If they found O.J. innocent, it would set a precedent that the system actually works, and that detectives couldn't just get away with murder.
Fine, I can see that there's been prejudice baked into the system, but is providing an innocent trial really enough to spark change throughout the entire justice system? Both of you have yet to provide substantial scientific evidence as to why.
The evidence was planted, and even if you don't buy that, it didn't pass the EDTA test. The blood that they found on a sock didn't dry and coagulate the way that normal human freshly cut blood would. It literally dried the same way blood found in a lab would.
Well, scientific evidence has proved false before, so I can't really trust any of this whole EDTA nonsense.
Well, if we can't even trust science is true, what else is there? Maybe you should get rid of evidence altogether and just have the jury based off who was the most charismatic.
Well, maybe they don't even need jurors, considering people are still out there thinking that the moon landing was fake.
Seriously, we're talking about tampered evidence and racial biases, not conspiracy theories.
And listen, you saw how Firm pleaded the fifth instead of just denying planting anything. Why would an innocent man not testify to clear his own name unless he had something to hide?
That did bother me, I'll admit, but even if the detective was corrupt, the evidence should be able to convict him.
But the evidence can be corrupt too. I mean, you can't use evidence from a dirty cop and pretend that it's not at least a little bit susceptible to bias as well.
Alright, I still have my doubts, but I'll admit the whole case was a mess, and all the evidence is questionable, and bias is undeniable.
So you're with us?
Yeah, not guilty.
Wow, did Matthew just change his mind? This might be a record.
Thank you so much, Matthew. On next week's episode, we uncover the secrets of Neverland. Did Michael Jackson touch those kids, or was he protecting them from Diddy? If you want to find out more, stay tuned for next week's episode. You've been listening to Reasonable Doubt.